Hello everybody and welcome to the Sophos Firewall Academy for Sophos Firewall version 18.5. My name is Ed Korsgaard and I will be delivering today's session. I'm glad that everyone can be here with me today as we are going to cover remote access and site-to-site connections on the Sophos Firewall. This is the second of 3 sessions in this Sophos Firewall Academy series, where we'll build on what we covered in session 1. In today's session, we'll be looking at how the Sophos Firewall can simplify the deployment and management of remote access VPNs. We will also talk about the SD-RED hardware and how it can be used to simplify site-to-site connections for branch offices. So let's start with remote access and some of the new features that can make deploying and managing VPNs faster, easier, and more efficient. There have been a few improvements to SSL VPNs on Sophos Firewall since version 18.0 was released. We are going to highlight some of the most important features. For starters, Sophos Firewall now supports global sharing of port 443 between the SSL VPN, the Web Server Protection module, and the user portal. Additionally, Sophos Firewall enforces TLS 1.2 for SSL VPN connections to prevent the use of less secure protocols. And Sophos Firewall now supports an increased number of concurrent VPN connections for both SSL and IPsec. This is for all models from the 86 all the way through the 750. Updated concurrent tunnel capacity can be found in Knowledge Base article 0000-39345. All right, so let's jump into our demo environment and talk about the Sophos Connect client. So there have been several significant updates to Sophos Connect since the release of Sophos Firewall version 18.0. For starters, the Sophos Connect client now supports both IPsec and SSL VPNs. So let me log in here, the web admin. And we're going to come over to our VPN menu. So as I just mentioned, the Sophos Connect client now supports both IPsec and SSL VPNs. Because of this, the Sophos Connect tab has now been renamed to IPsec Remote Access. This was done to avoid any confusion over the type of VPN being configured. IPsec Remote Access with Sophos Connect now includes support for groups, simplifying the management of the VPN configuration. So let's go ahead and walk through a quick configure of a Sophos Connect IPsec. We begin by enabling IPsec Remote Access for Sophos Connect. We then select the interface that users are going to be connecting to. In our example here, this is going to be port B, which happens to be my WAN port. I need to set an authentication type. I can choose a pre-shared key or a digital certificate. We're going to go with a pre-shared key, and we need to make sure to enter our pre-shared key twice. Type it in and confirm it. We then have the option of entering a local and remote ID. While not required, they do make the connection more secure. I'm going to leave them blank at the moment just to simplify my configuration. And finally, we can select our allowed users and groups. I can select any users and groups that I want to be able to authenticate against this VPN. So I'm going to select a group, the open group, and I'm also going to add J. Smith to my list. Then as I scroll down into the client information section, I can give this a name. Actually, let's rename that. There we go. And I can choose what IP range I want to assign to the users that connect. And then finally, I can assign a DNS server, which will allow my connected clients to look up names against an internal server. Towards the bottom here, I have these idle settings. The idle settings will allow me to disconnect the tunnel if the user is not active on the VPN for a certain amount of time. I'm going to set 300 seconds. Now, normally, at this point, I can now apply this VPN. Oh, and I forgot. No spaces in my connection name. There we go. It'll give me a quick warning about updating the pre-shared key. And I have now enabled and configured the IPsec VPN. Couple other things to note. The download client button can now be found down at the bottom of the screen, along with the export connection and a button to reset this entire configuration. Please note in version 18, the download client was found up in the general settings area. Now, new to this configuration, if I scroll down, we have some advanced settings. The advanced configuration was previously done in the Sophos Connect admin client, which was downloaded as part of the download client button, but can now be done directly on the Sophos Firewall, including configuration for split tunneling and enabling two-factor authentication. The Sophos Connect admin tool is no longer required. And this is especially important because originally the Sophos Connect admin tool was available for Windows only. So now any operating system that can get into the web admin can configure the advanced settings. Additionally, to make configuring things like security heartbeat easier when split tunneling is enabled in remote access, we have a new option to send the security heartbeat through the tunnel. And it does this through the use of a new security heartbeat over VPN object that is pre-created and maintained by the Sophos Firewall. No longer do you need to go and look for the config file to get the address for security heartbeat. And additionally, it's going to help in reducing the chance of a typo in the configuration. So once we have configured this, for the moment, I'm going to leave my advanced settings off. We can then export the configurations. The configurations are important to configure the IPsec connections. So if I export the configuration, it's going to download a file that contains a couple of configuration files. So this configuration, which can only be exported from the web admin, will include an SCX file and a TBG file. The TBG file only contains the basic configuration, and it will always tunnel all traffic back to the Sophos Firewall. On the other hand, the SCX includes all of the advanced settings. And to help you understand this, there is a README file. Let's go ahead and open that in Notepad, which details what the SCX and the TGB both contain. All right. So, with that in mind, let's talk about a couple of other things that go along with this. Moving over to my user portal, if I log in as J. Smith here, Under the VPN tab, I now have the option to download the Sophos Connect client for both Windows and Mac. However, notice that there is no configuration for this client. The configuration still needs to be provided by the admin. All right. However, as you will see shortly, this can also be done through the use of an automatic provisioning configuration file. And we're going to take a look at that here in just a little bit. Now, if you are configured for SSL, the SSL client will still be available for download along with the SSL configuration. And in such cases, if you want to configure the Sophos Connect client with SSL, then what you will need to do is download the SSL configuration for other OSs. This is an archive that contains only the .ovpn configuration file and can be used and imported into Sophos Connect to configure the SSL VPN. Now, talking about this just a little bit more, let me jump back over to my slides, as there's a very special note that we want you to be aware of. The legacy SSL VPN client and the new Sophos Connect client cannot be installed on the same computer, as they will conflict with each other. To prevent this, when installing Sophos Connect, it will check for the legacy VPN, but only in its default installation path, which happens to be Program Files x86, Sophos, Sophos SSL VPN. And if the Sophos Connect client finds an installation of the SSL VPN client, it will display an error, as can be seen on the screen here, and it will cancel the installation. Now, if the legacy SSL VPN client has been installed to a non-default location, the Sophos Connect client will not detect it, and it will continue to install. This may cause an error and cause both clients to be inoperable. So please keep that in mind. Now, I mentioned an automatic provisioning file. So we can now perform automatic provisioning of VPN connections when using Sophos Connect for both IPsec and SSL. To do this, we start by creating a provisioning file, which contains the details of the Sophos Firewall. When this provisioning file is imported into Sophos Connect, it will attempt to go out to the Sophos Firewall, connecting to the user portal, and will ask the user to authenticate with their credentials. The Sophos Connect client, after authentication, can then download the connection policy, and it will use this policy to configure Sophos Connect and then establish the VPN connection. With automatic provisioning, the automatic provisioning file supports multiple gateways, and they can be selected either by random based on latency or an order. It supports multiple connections and two-factor authentication. So let's jump back to our demo environment and take a look at how this works. All right, so I'm going to switch over to a client where I have already installed Sophos Connect to save us a little bit of time. So here I can see Sophos Connect. It is already installed. And as you can see, I do not have any connections inside of Sophos Connect. I happen to have a folder on the desktop that has some auto provisioning files. And if I take a look at my first auto provisioning file, this is an example of what you might create. As you can see, it's a basic JSON file, and it includes the gateway hostname in this example, although this could be an IP address. So we're going to be connecting out to lun-gw1.sophos.www. My user portal port is the default 443, As you can see, OTP, one-time passwords, is disabled for this. We're not using two-factor authentication. All right, and I do allow them to save the credentials. So we've got some configuration here. So one nice thing about Sophos Connect is when the Sophos Connect client is installed, it creates a file association for .pro files, which is what your JSON file needs to be named as. So this file here is called config.pro. What this means is when I double-click this file, the Sophos Connect client knows that this is a configuration for it, and it's going to import it and run the file to start the connection. So let's go ahead and see how this works. I double-click config, we saw it pop up really quick, and now we see our Sophos Connect client attempting to connect to the user portal. Now, I am using a self-signed certificate, so I do have to confirm that it's safe to proceed. Now, I'm being asked for credentials. So we set up our VPN for J Smith, if you recall just a little bit ago. I enter J Smith's password, and then I've got CAPTCHA that needs to be hopefully entered correctly. I hope that's an EN and not a CN. All right. I can choose to save the username and password, but I'm not going to for this example. And I click sign in. If everything was done correctly, it will connect to the user portal, download the configuration, and as you can see, it has already connected to the VPN. So when we import that provisioning file, we authenticate, we connect to this WAN interface, so the CAPTCHA was required. If the interface was internal, the CAPTCHA would not have been required. We've downloaded our configuration, and we are connected. The one thing to note is our certificate was not trusted, so we did see a certificate error. If you want to resolve this, normally you wouldn't want your users to see this. You can ensure that either your certificate includes the host name in your SAN, or you can deploy the CA cert to the endpoints, or just use a certificate from a trusted CA. All right, now let's see something else that's really neat. And hopefully I can go back and forth fast enough. So we have a connected VPN. If I come back to the firewall and I make a change to the configuration, I'm going to do something really simple. I am going to add a second DNS server. And when I click apply, if I Alt-Tab fast enough, I can see that my connection is now disabled. It has downloaded the new configuration and then reconnected right away. So one amazing feature is that it has the ability to automatically update the policies when I change them in the firewall, and it will just re-download them and reconnect for the users. It is near seamless. Additionally, if I do disconnect this myself, I will see my connection, and I actually have a couple of options for this connection. Using the little gear, I can delete the connection, I can rename it to make more sense, but there is an option also to update the policy. So if I need to manually update the policy, if it's not connecting for some reason, I can choose this option and it will once again prompt me for my credentials. Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete this because I want to look at the second connection that I have here. So looking at this connection, again, it's a JSON file, and all I've done is put two gateways in with a simple comma in between them. So I've got my NY, my New York gateway, and my London gateway. And if I run this file, it's going to go ahead and import the information. I need to accept the server, accept the certificate, authenticate against the user portal, and I completely misspelled that. JSMITH, perfect. And of course, good old CAPTCHA. So when I sign in, it will now connect to both firewalls, assuming that the user portal does accept the user account as the same. And when it's done, it will connect to whichever one is defined as the primary in the multiple connections. Now, to see that this actually worked, I can disconnect. And if I look in my client, what I'm going to see is that I have two different connections. My Sophos Firewall Academy connection that I created as part of my demo, and one that existed previously that was just simply called ny-gw. So here we can see this multiple connections file creating multiple VPNs inside of Sophos Connect. Now, for a few additional resources, let's jump back to our slide deck. And take a look at this. So there is a new recommended reads on the Sophos community that details a lot of useful information on configuring remote access VPNs on Sophos Firewall, along with links to other helpful resources. You can find it on community.sophos.com. You'll see a link for recommended reads inside of the XG category. So highly recommend taking a look at that and digging through the extremely useful information that can be found there. All right, let's talk a little bit about site-to-site connections. In this site-to-site section, we're going to focus on the SD-RED devices that are now available, and then we're going to take a brief look at Azure's secure SD-WAN offering. So shortly after the release of version 18, we launched the new SD-RED 20 and SD-RED 60 hardware, and support for it has been included since MR1. The new SD-RED hardware provides more throughput than the older devices, the option for dual power supplies for redundancy, and an expansion slot that can be used to add Wi-Fi or 4G. As of version 18.0 MR3, Maintenance Release 3, we can no longer add a RED 10 to the Sophos Firewall, so please keep that in mind. The SD-RED 60 has a few benefits over the SD-RED 20. The throughput is increased from 250 megabits to 850 megabits. Additionally, the SD-RED 60 adds a second WAN port, which allows for failover or balancing of the WAN link. Finally, it adds PoE, Power over Ethernet, to 2 of the 4 switch ports on the unit, allowing you to connect various networking hardware, such as Wi-Fi access points, without the need for additional power supplies. Very useful for larger branch offices that might need a little more coverage, and you don't want to have to run power to all the locations where you'd like to deploy this hardware. And finally, the Sophos Firewall supports the secure SD-WAN offering on Microsoft Azure's Virtual WAN. This allows administrators to seamlessly connect to workloads hosted in Azure Virtual Networks globally. Integration with Azure Virtual WAN offers Sophos Firewall's full suite of protection capabilities for securing applications and network traffic flows, along with scalable SD-WAN connectivity to deploy the Microsoft Global Network as a secure enterprise WAN backbone instead of using leased lines. The Azure Virtual WAN uses a hub and spoke architecture to connect your hybrid data centers to other remote offices, backhauling the traffic flow through a global connected Microsoft network. This allows enterprises to leverage Microsoft's existing WAN infrastructure and take advantage of this established and well-tested solution. A guide to configuring this can be found in the Sophos community recommended reads. So, since we have mentioned the recommended reads a couple of times, Let's take a quick look, and I could have actually gone a little quicker there by going to community.sophos.com. Within the Sophos community, I can select, for example, XG Firewall. And at the top here, we can see this sub menu. So we've got the community and everything in the main menu. In the secondary menu here, we've got our release notes. We have our discussions. And then this third one is the one of interest. This is the recommended reads. So for XG Firewall, again, in the Sophos community, I chose Sophos XG Firewall. And then I've got my recommended reads. So once again, just wanted to point it out, highly recommend this. There are some great articles here for the XG Firewall. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me, and I'm going to hand back control to the team to take your questions.